Welcome, everyone, and thank you for registering for the 4th Annual ArchivesSpace Online Forum. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace. We have a very full schedule, and I don't want to take up too much time, but before we dive into the forum, I want to very briefly take care of a few housekeeping items. I have just dropped the link to the forum's wiki in the chat. This includes the agenda, some attendee tips, and a post-forum evaluation that I hope you all complete. You may leave and come back during the sessions as you wish. Your connection information will remain the same throughout the day. But if you plan to attend any of the discussion groups tomorrow, you will need to have registered for that separately. You can still register for tomorrow's discussions by following the registration link linked on the forum's wiki. You'll receive separate connection information directly from Zoom for tomorrow. We are recording today's sessions. Recordings will be linked in the event wiki in the coming days. We are using Zoom webinar today, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions of a presenter, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will hold all questions for each presenter until the end of their presentation. At that time, I'll read your questions out loud to the presenter for them to address. Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A in an effort to keep the forum on schedule, so keep an eye on the Q&A for additional information and resources. If you have a general question, need some other form of assistance, or just want to chat with your fellow attendees, please feel free to reach out using the chat option at the bottom of the screen instead of the Q&A. You also have the ability to turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can elect to show or hide subtitles by selecting Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen and pressing the little up arrow there. You can also elect to view the full transcript either in tandem with subtitles or in lieu of subtitles by selecting that option as well. If you need help during the forum, please use the chat box or email archivespace@lyrasis.org. Keep in mind, due to the large number of attendees and the fact we are currently participating in the forum, we may not be able to resolve all issues or get to your email, but we'll do our best. Now, I have some thank yous. Thank you to all of the presenters and discussion leaders we will hear from over the next 2 days. Each presenter will be introduced in their session, but I wanted to acknowledge them here as well. We couldn't have forums like this without engaged users willing to share their knowledge and experiences with the rest of the community. I also know that we all have a lot on our plates right now, and I'm deeply appreciative for each presenter dedicating the time and energy to participate in this forum. So a sincere thank you to everyone on this list. And thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to a great 2 days of presentations, discussions, and learning. Please feel free to chime in during Q&As, connect with one another in the chat, or just enjoy time learning from others working in ArchivesSpace. And with that, let's dive into this day's forum. Lexi, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, so feel free to share whenever you're ready. So the first session of the day is Implementing and Integrating Penn State's ArchivesSpace Public User Interface. In the fall of 2021, the Eberly Family Special Collections Library at Penn State University launched its ArchivesSpace Public User Interface. For 6 months, this site worked alongside the older Finding Aids website due to the challenges of integrating systems and to smooth the transition for researchers and staff. This presentation will discuss the Collection Services team's process of preparing ArchivesSpace for public access and launching the site. Lexi deGraffenreid will discuss Finding Aid data cleanup and how Penn State staff used a 2020 Finding Aid audit as well as legacy Finding Aid statuses to prioritize updating legacy Finding Aid data. She will also discuss working with a graduate student assistant to perform data cleanup work by quickly updating standardized language to conform with current practices. Then Clair will discuss ArchivesSpace integrations and collaborating with university library strategic technologies to personalize the public site. He will also discuss the challenges of integrating Aeon to replicate requesting functionality from the former site to assist the research services team in efficiently managing requests. In addition, Kevin will discuss integrating ArchivesSpace with Penn State's Content DM repository to display thumbnail images of digitized records in ArchivesSpace, facilitating digital preservation guidelines while more effectively promoting Penn State's digital collections. Attendees will learn about the challenges and opportunities of integrating ArchivesSpace with other systems, as well as conducting large-scale data cleanup of resource records. As I mentioned, your presenters today are Lexi deGraffenreid and Clair. Lexi is the processing archivist and interim co-head of collection services at Penn State University Libraries. She oversees the accessioning, processing, and locations management of the Eberly Family Special Collections Libraries, archival, and rare book collections. She is also looking forward to spring weather in order to explore the mountains of Pennsylvania again. Kevin Clair is the Digital Collections Librarian and Interim Co-Head of Collection Services at Penn State University Libraries. He works on discovery, data integration, and outreach to curators, selectors, and general users regarding Penn State's archival and digital collections. Kevin has been active in the ArchivesSpace community since 2014 and roles both here and at the University of Denver. He is also a mid-pack Cat 5 cyclocross rider who recently made his debut in the Masters categories of the Philadelphia racing scene. I don't know what the last sentence meant, but it sounds exciting. So welcome, Lexi and Kevin.
Thank you, Jessica. Penn State University is a land-grant university with 22 Commonwealth campuses across Pennsylvania. The Eberly Family Special Collections Library is located on the University Park campus in central Pennsylvania. We stored approximately 60,000 linear feet of material and over 200,000 volumes. Our collecting areas include labor and working class history, Penn State history, LGBTQIA history, women's history, literature and languages, sports history, among other collecting areas. We are the largest archival repository at Penn State. However, a few of our CCL partners also have small archives, and their information is also housed in our archive space. Prior to 2021, we had, and we still have, a static HTML finding aid website, as well as a browse A to Z finding aids list. These were kind of old 90s looking static HTML finding aids. And although we had a search bar, which theoretically searched across finding aids, we knew that this had not been indexed in a number of years, and there was difficulty in doing so. So it was out of date with any new finding aids which had been published, or for finding aids which had been updated. This old finding aid site also had a number of issues. It required us to export and manually edit EAD in order to publish finding aids to this website. Because of that manual workflow and short staffing, new and updated finding aids were not routinely published or republished for several years prior to 2019. And in 2019, we were unsure of which finding aids were current and updated and which were not. So it was a slow process of updating them. There was also that issue of not being routinely Solr indexed for the search functionality. And just in general, it was difficult to know which finding aids were up to date and which were not, due to this lapse of publishing and republishing finding aids, as well as our continued accrual, especially of university archives collections. So in 2020, of course, we got shut down in March with the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of our 2 to 3 week work from home projects was to conduct a high level finding aids audit to just discover at the collections level in what ways and to what extent is our data messy. So I conducted a high level audit of over 2,275 resource records in ArchivesSpace for both completeness and the existence of offensive and obfuscating language. So in completeness, did this meet our minimum DAX standards and local standards as far as 24 minimum elements that we had targeted? And then offensiveness and obfuscation, did harmful or offensive language exist in the collection level notes, and or do these notes obscure the existence of marginalized voices within our collections? The results of this audit were not great. Very, very few finding aids actually had all of the minimum required elements. We also discovered that 750 resource records represented single items or one folder collections, and that these tended to have little to no information other than a title, maybe an extent, and maybe an abstract. Also, a lot of our finding aids were outdated to older standards of archival description and discovery information as far as our mandated notes. As far as offensiveness, although only 30 resource records contained antiquated or offensive language, and only an additional 79 included coded or obfuscating language, this really wasn't a representation of how good our finding aids were as far as respectful diversity inclusion. Really what that was a representation of absence and how much information was lacking. So that was also another thing that came out of the audit that we're like, we need to take a look at that. So how did we make sense of the mess that we had? There was a lot of data that came out of this audit because we were looking at 24 high-level notes. I'm not going to go really into depth in it, and I'm really just showing a sampling of how messy the data was. So first up on the top left is an overview of resource records which lacked a scope and content note. Of those that did not have a scope and content note, 28% had a general note, which effectively acted as a scope and content note. And an additional 27% had two abstracts where that second abstract functioned as the required scope and content note. The second donut is an overview of our conditions governing access notes and is really here to just show the wide variability of weird and old data that did not conform to current local standards. So this is just kind of an overview of the weird things that showed up in our conditions governing access note. Only about 54% of our conditions governing access notes were current to our current standards. And then this last one is really showing the difference between the single item or single folder resource records completeness and the completeness of the data overall once we remove those from the data set. Because of how minimal that those 750 resource records were and how sparse they were, it really improved the data immediately by just removing those from the data set and identifying them as catalog only. So clearly we have our data was a bit messy and we knew it was messy. So when we were thinking about the PUI, we wanted to put our best foot forward and thinking about cleaning up this data. One of the things that we focused on was the finding aid status. So you can see here in this little diagram, all the many different finding aid statuses that we used to have, including some strange ones like XML regex or audit cat, audit inventory that just needed some further thought. So we kind of used this variability of finding aid status to target the resource records that were most in need of review. Our goal in this data cleanup was to achieve a golden minimum for all of our finding aids, and at least for the vast majority of them. We really focused on doing a baseline update and focusing on the notes that we had standardized the format of and bringing those up to our current minimum standards. We did not focus on notes that were a bit more subjective. So we did not focus on abstract scope and content note or improving any of those more free-form notes because we didn't have the time to do so, and that would have required a lot more work. So it wasn't, it was a baseline to golden minimum, but it was not a wholesale kind of in-depth revision. So by prioritizing standardized note, it allowed us to do a lot of data cleanup very quickly, but it wasn't really comprehensive. And then by updating finding aid statuses to simplify them, we could also further segregate off the CAT only materials so that we know that ultimately those resource records will be suppressed and only handled in the catalog. Really special thank you to our graduate student, Ben Mitchell, who has since left us. He was an immense help in doing a large number of these on short notice and doing them very accurately and very well. Doing this also allowed us to continue doing remote work during the ongoing pandemic in fall of 2021 and then continuing into this semester. We are not finished. We do have a lot of resource records and data cleanup is always an iterative thing. Currently, we have 1,927 finding aids published in our PUI. We have focused to 3 different types of finding aid statuses being published, status published, minimum record, unprocessed. We have updated around 650 to 750 resource records to that current minimum standard. But we still have a lot to do. We focused on the weird finding aid statuses. So we have not gone through the ones that already had the finding aid status of published. So that's a large number of resource records kind of still to just review. But we thought since they were already published that those would require the least amount of work. So we put that off until later. We also still have some statuses to address. One is needs attention and the other is do not post. Do not post is mostly under litigation hold, so it's not a huge priority. We also need to do more assessment at the archival object level to address these issues of completeness and description accuracy, as well as to suppress those 750 resource records, which will be handled only in the catalog. And we are working with the cataloging team to do that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Lexi. So I'm going to talk today about our sort of design considerations and technical data cleanup tasks and things related to actually launching the PUI. And I'll be doing that. It won't be much of a demonstration of the ArchivesSpace public user interface because I imagine a lot of people have seen that before. It's going to mostly be like some of the decisions we made to make it work the way that our research archivists and reference archivists expect it to work, and in a way that allows us to integrate it better with some of the other discovery and access platforms that interact with what we have in special collections on a daily basis. So we had 4 desired outcomes for this migration project. One of the main ones was the cross collection and cross repository searching. Like Lexi was talking about, Penn State is one university geographically dispersed is the line, but we have the main campus at University Park plus 22 Commonwealth campuses, many of whom, or some of whom have like full-fledged archives with like separate facilities for the archives and things, with finding aids that they want to have published online. So our ArchivesSpace is a multi-repository instance, one for us, and then we have 4 other campuses that have published repositories at the moment, and 1 or 2 others who are interested in publishing their own down the road. So we want to be able to support that from the get-go. And being able to search across the collections that we have, even within a single repository, is something that I mentioned in the chat that we rely entirely on Google site search for that on the finding aid site. So having something that's built into the public site was something that was going to be really important for us. We're an Aeon shop for requesting and for having work orders work their way through the system. So being able to, if not fully replicate the way that Aeon requesting works in our old finding aid site, at least get something in place that was that reduced the amount of work that our research services department has to do to translate what comes from ArchivesSpace into something that they can use to go and fulfill requests or work with our annex services people for our offsite storage facilities to fulfill requests. Connecting with digital collections was a big desire for us for a couple reasons. On the public side, we wanted people, when they searched our collections, if their search would bring up something that had been digitized and was in our digital collections program, that they could see it right away before they either requested to look at it in the reading room, or they can maybe discover other digital collections that we have or other items in that collection that they might not have known about before. And then on the back end of things, we don't have a complete sense yet of what from special collections has been digitized and is available through the digital collections program. And we also have a number of materials that have been digitized for access scans that aren't part of the program. So we're looking into using ArchivesSpace as a way to really give us an inventory of everything that's been digitized so that we know, in order to fulfill reference inquiries, that we don't need to create another access scan because one already exists, or if we can tell that something is being requested a lot, we can upgrade that access copy to something that gets piped into our digital preservation program. So just looking at ways to better control the digital collections on their own and kind of as they pertain to the physical collections. And then the last thing is just to share a visual language with our other discovery systems, meaning make it look like the catalog. Our initial launch didn't look like the catalog, and it caused a lot of problems with like library website JavaScript and CSS colliding with ArchivesSpace JavaScript and CSS in a way that like completely broke our mobile site. So that had to get fixed, but that was like the first thing I noticed that needed to get fixed. So it looks more like the catalog now, and I think it looks and works quite a lot better. Lexi, next slide, please. So this is what the public site looks like now. And on the next slide, I'll show the catalog so you can kind of see what I mean by the visual language. So the catalog, I'll save that for next. Yeah, so we customized all of this explanatory text here underneath the title of the site. That's lifted directly from our finding aid site. So that's one of the things. Mostly we can replicate all of the functionality pretty easily. I mean, the public site is a full index of archive space. There's a few things. One of the things we ran into is that's going to be that I dislike is just it's hard to make static pages in archive space. You kind of have to create you have to make it part of a plugin. It's a little bit, it's fine, but it's a little bit rough. But we do have a couple of static pages that we have sort of like finding aids to finding aids, mostly related to our vertical files that are not yet here that I'll need to just like really quickly replicate somehow. But other than that, yeah, I think this was the easiest part, was getting all this about text, getting the front page to look the way it does. Like, this was relatively simple. You want to go to the next slide, Lexi, please? So just by comparison, this is what our catalog looks like. So yeah, the goal was to get ArchivesSpace to look as much like this as we could. Just so quick thing, the catalog runs on Blacklight. Our public site does not run on ArcLight. Just to get ahead of the question of why not? We're kind of in a space technology infrastructure wise where we're not going to have success with having another home locally hosted thing. So as far as archival discovery and access goes, like hosted solutions are best. So we're just going to kind of roll with the PUI and see how far it takes us. So that's why we're not doing Blacklight for both at the moment. But yeah, I think visually we can pretty mostly easily make the look and feel look like this. So that's been our goal as far as that last point goes. Next slide, please. So I mentioned CrossCampus Searching. I just did a quick search for Altoona. The Altoona campus has been one of the heaviest users of ArchivesSpace as far as our non-UP Commonwealth campus locations. So you can see in a couple different places, because of the way the indexer works, you get Altoona's collections right at the top of the search results when you search for Altoona. And then in the facets, you can see we have results by or about the Altoona campus. There's holdings there from both the Special Collections Library up at University Park, and then also you see all of the holdings from our Altoona campus. And they're processing through their archives pretty quickly. So yeah, we've had a lot of success working with the staff and faculty down there to get their collections online, and really kind of demonstrate to other Commonwealth campuses who might be interested in this the benefits of having their collections processed and available, and being able to show up in search results right alongside the stuff that we have in the Special Collections Library. So this has been a big success and something that we never had before. So I'm pretty happy with this result. And like I said, with campuses, we have a couple others that have finding aids fully described in the system, and a couple others that are interested in working with us to get their things online through ArchivesSpace. So we'll be growing our Commonwealth campus holdings and description here in the months ahead, I think. Next slide. So we're just beginning to integrate with digital collections. I don't have a slide for what this looks like on the staff side, but I could talk about that in the Q&A if people are interested. What we've done is I and Ben Mitchell, who was working with us, who Lexi mentioned, Gwyn Johns is one of our staff members who's been helping out with this project. And then Haven Harrington is the other student employee that I'd like to mention as being a big help with this project. What we've been trying to do is for everything that everything that's been described at the level that it's been digitized. So like if it's an item level record, we'll add a thumbnail for the item level record using the digital objects module in ArchivesSpace. And we use Content DM, that's our platform right now, and it supports the IIIF API. So we're using IIIF manifest URLs whenever we can in anticipation. I'm very excited for that IIIF integration that I think Yale is working on. And so we're sort of anticipating that to be in the core code at some point, so that instead of just having a thumbnail here, because you can't really do anything with that on the PUI, but if this were running universal viewer, then you could zoom and pan and see the metadata and do all that cool stuff. So that's what we're hoping for. But in the meantime, we've just gone ahead and put IIIF URLs as file URIs on a digital object that attaches to this. Sometimes it's a folder record, sometimes it's an item record, depending on how the collection was arranged. But it gives us the ability to, when people do a search and land on one of these items, they can actually see the item rather than just having the metadata there. And I think it adds a little bit visually to the user experience. So it's something we're doing both for that reason and to give ourselves a sense of what's been digitized and what's been made available. As right now, we're doing it just for the stuff that's posted, that's online publicly. We also have a lot of access scans that are not available publicly. We keep them on hand for reference inquiries. That's something we'd also like to get inventory, but it's a down the road project since it's not so much public facing compared with the suspension bridge here. Lexi, next slide, please. So this is the part that, go back one more. Yeah, this is the part that's taking the longest. So Aeon requesting is something that is very valuable for research services. And we need our Aeon requests to look a certain way to facilitate, like they need to have the location information somewhere in order to facilitate like paging it, going to get it, and having that happen sort of in a timely manner so that stuff is there when the researchers come by. We don't have that information in ArchivesSpace consistently. There have been, I'm new both to Penn State's ArchivesSpace and to Aeon because we didn't have it when I was at Denver. So we used Alma for all of our work orders. So it's inconsistent across different collections. Like we have some location information, but not others. The catalog tends to have it, the catalog does have it more often. So oftentimes our workflow is when a request comes in, we'll go and make the same request, but in a catalog in order to get the location information so that we can know where the thing is before we go get it, or before the annex services crew who run our offsite storage facilities goes to get it. So we have Aeon requesting live in ArchivesSpace right now, and it places requests. And now you can go to the next slide, Lexi. And this is what it looks like. So what it will tell you is that it'll tell you what box the person wants when they make a request from a folder or an item or a box record, but it won't tell you where on the shelf that it lives. And for that, you have to go somewhere else. Like you'll have to go to the catalog or sometimes, but not always, the finding aid site will have that same information. So this is a challenge that we've had. And this is the reason that we haven't completely turned off the old finding aid site, is that we're still working out whether our inability to get the request to work right is an issue with the Atlas plugin for Aeon, or whether it's an issue with our data. It's At this point, it's an issue with our data that we're going to have to eventually figure out a workaround for that saves people's time on the staff end. But so we're working out some different, this is going to take, I know how to do it, but it's a very big project to get it to work across however many thousands of linear feet of stuff that we have. We have a lot of top container records that are going to need locations for this to work. So that's the next big project in front of me, is resolving that. And only then can we decommission that old finding aid site and rely completely on the PUI for everything. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Aeon. Here are some links. I don't think they're clickable, but the slides will get shared. All of our stuff is up on GitHub, so you can go to the first link, and I haven't written documentation yet, but it'll show you what the code looks like. And then the other 3 links, the second one takes you to our ASpace PUI, the third takes you to our library catalog, and then the last one is just out to our content DM. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Lexi. Thank you, Kevin. That was great. We already have some questions in the Q&A for both of you. As a reminder, if you have a question for Lexi or Kevin or about this presentation, please do drop your question into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. The first question is from Cara. Do you have an example of the workflow for your audit? How did you set your priorities? What were your priorities? Cara says, my data is migrated. I'm just overwhelmed and don't know where to begin. So maybe any tips or tricks you could offer.
I mean, I had the grand help of a global pandemic preventing me from going to the office. And this project, the audit, was kind of started on a dime, and was kind of started in the spirit of like, oh, we're just going to be off for a few weeks and we probably won't finish it, but we can chip away at it. So the priority was collection level data. So we were not looking at all at the inventories, so the archival objects, anything like that. And I basically came up with the workflow as I did it, and I had a very large spreadsheet of an export of all of our resource records and a column for each of our minimal required elements plus a few, and then it was just a very simple, like, yes, no, this does not exist system with just a / if there were additional notes in an additional notes column. It was very much just, I start with A and I read through that resource record and I see what does and does not exist, and then I move on through almost 3,000 records.
Thanks, Lexi. Maybe some follow-up that might help Cara. Knowing what you know now, would you have done that differently? I mean, you thought it was only going to take a couple weeks. So would you maybe go about the process differently, or any recommendations for someone taking on a big project like this?
I think it worked very well for our purposes of the time. I would have preferred some planning time beforehand to think about it more thoroughly. I would have also done things differently to focus on that second part of obfuscated and offensive information. And we need to do more assessment further on. But given where we were and the suddenness of it, it actually ended up being an incredibly enlightening experiment. It ended up only taking a few months. So it was so much useful has come out of it. I'm hesitant to critique too much.
Thanks, Lexi. We have another question. So a question came in through the Q&A. Where is the Aeon plugin pulling location info from? And then Amory Lyons from Atlas commented in the chat, the Aeon plugin on the ASpace PUI does not currently import location information, but will in the future. The ASpace client add-on, and she linked it in the chat if you'd like to look at that, for Aeon can import location info as long as the location info is attached to the top container record for the requested material. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
I was just going to show one thing, but I want to share my screen first.
All right, go for it.
All right. Share Firefox. So just in case, I don't know if people have seen this before, or how familiar people are with the Aeon ArchivesSpace integration, but so here's an item record that has Aeon requesting turned on. And if you scroll, and I have just inspect on in Firefox. So if you scroll up, here are all the hidden fields that the integration adds, and all of these instance underscore, all of these, I think all of these fields in general map to stuff that you can set up in Aeon as far as open URL mappings. So you can, any of this stuff can get mapped to something that goes into an Aeon request. So this one doesn't have, oh yes, I'm looking for the long display string. There it is. So this is the one we're trying to use to eventually get the location information in. I've done it before, but not consistently, and I don't need half this stuff. So a little more customization there is what we're looking for.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, we've got a couple more questions in the chat. One person asked, I'm curious about the decision to provide access to the single folder collections through the catalog only. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I would like to talk about this in a utilitarian way, and then I'll let Lexi talk about it in a philosophical way, if that's okay.
Yes.
So I didn't mention it because it was a little bit off topic, but we're also doing, we're implementing a digital preservation program at Penn State right now. And one of the things that we're thinking about is mapping. We want to have identifiers that map to what's in the collection management system right now. And so just from that standpoint, like we don't want to necessarily do any reprocessing of collections to make this work. And so from a purely get it done perspective, that's kind of what we're going for, is like, however it's processed right now, that's what the identifiers are going to be for the purposes of sending stuff to libsafe. And that's kind of how that works. So that's, for me, that's what I'm doing. I'll let Lexi answer the rest.
So I'm also going to talk about it from a very utilitarian perspective. Everything we have archivally is represented in the catalog. The catalog is the system of record for anything that exists on a shelf in any of the 22 campus libraries, and that's not going to change. So really, the benefit of ArchivesSpace is multi-level hierarchical archival description. So that's really what it's built for. For single items, what you're trying to do is represent one thing in a hierarchical manner, and it's a duplication of work when we have a very, very small archival description team. Currently, we have a processing archivist and a processing assistant. We have an accessioning archivist. Hopefully, we'll have an accessioning assistant, and that's it. We have a dedicated special collections cataloging team. So that's kind of two people processing over 55,000 linear feet of material. So when it comes to something that is one item or one folder, it's just better represented in the catalog. That's going to be the location information anyway. It's still searchable. It's still discoverable. It's less work on the archival discovery team. It's less work on the cataloging team to make sure that it's not too duplicative across two systems, and this lets us focus on things that are more complex.
Great, thanks. All right, we have about 3 minutes left, and there are 3 questions in the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question that came in first. And then Lexi and Kevin, if you could type answers to the other two questions. And Kevin, I think you already may be answering one. So the last question for Kevin and Lexi, did you have guidelines for your audit of offensive or obfuscating language, or how did you evaluate this?
This is a really interesting question because the answer was not yet. So this actually was a touch point to a much larger ongoing program that we have. So we'd started thinking about this back in 2019. We used the purpose of this audit to do a kind of quick yes, no at the collection level. And then as we were going through it, we realized we had a much bigger issue on hand. And we also realized that we needed some guidance on top of that. So what came out of the Finding AIDS audit was an inclusive description working group who then came together to write what we now have, which is the Inclusive Description Style Guide and the Inclusive Description Research Guide, which we just launched in January of this year and put into use. So we did not want to do any more in-depth assessment until we had those guidelines in place. And so we just have gotten those guidelines in place. And so really what I was doing for the description level, the high level audit, was really quick and dirty. It was pretty obvious, like, is it a racial slur? Then yes. But then it got into a much grayer area of, well, is this obfuscating, or does this collection document a marginalized community that you wouldn't necessarily notice it from the description that we had, or basically is there just not enough description that exists in order to describe this collection adequately and respectfully? So it was a lot of gut feeling at this stage, where then we use that to be like, we need to put some guidance into place, and that's what we've been doing.
Thanks, Lexi. I am going to be following up with you about the style guide that you created. That sounds really interesting, and something I know the community would be interested in. Thank you again to Lexi deGraffenreid and Kevin Clair for your excellent presentation. We're going to move along in the schedule.